I'll start again. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. My name is Farzana Shaikh. I will be moderating this session on the Arab Spring. And I have here with me this afternoon a distinguished panel. I'll begin alphabetically. Susan Abulhawa, and please do correct me if I don't get your pronunciation right, a Palestinian-American activist, author of a book titled Mornings in Jenin, which became a bestseller in 2010. She's also the founder, if I'm not mistaken, of an NGO that goes by the name of Playgrounds for Palestine. Susan Abulhawa, right there on my right. To my left, Mr. Reza Deghati, an Iranian-French photographer, born in Iran, settled in France. He made his name as an accomplished photographer and the recipient, if I'm not mistaken, in 2002 of an Emmy Award. And in 2006, you were elected as a fellow of the National Geographic. So, Mr. Reza Deghati. To my far left, Ms. Mona Elthawy, an Egyptian-American, a writer and a public commentator, and of course very well known, particularly in the UK, which is where I'm based, and the author most recently of the provocatively titled Headscarves and Hymen 2015. She's deeply engaged in questions of reform in the Muslim world, particularly, of course, the status of women. And in 2011, I should say, her illegal detention by the Egyptian authorities, who she accused of turning a blind eye to her physical and sexual assault during incarceration, caused an international stir. Finally, to my immediate right, Ms. Viviana Mazza, who has been a journalist for 10 years with the Italian daily Corriere della Sera. She has covered the region, Syria and Egypt, and is, I think it's fair to say, a specialist on the region. Now, the title of this afternoon's panel is The Arab Spring, a frank obituary, and there's a question mark. And, of course, I'm going to start by asking my panelists, beginning on my right, whether we should start with the question, is it really time to write an obituary, or is there still life left in a moment that was, by any definition, a moment of great inspiration for civil resistance movements worldwide? Susan.
So I was actually intrigued by the title of this panel, and really kind of questioned why I was chosen to be on this, and I could only think is because I'm an Arab and I'm an activist. But I think that what the world saw in Egypt and Tunisia and subsequently called the Arab Spring was really the more visible and spectacular manifestation of a more fluid struggle that had been going on for decades, and that continues today. I don't think, I wouldn't by any stretch of the imagination say that the Arab Spring is dead. I don't know who would think to write an obituary for it. That's not how revolution happens. What's visible to the outside world tends to be just kind of like what we saw in Tahrir Square, which was indeed truly spectacular, truly inspiring. But it wasn't a discrete moment. It was connected to decades of struggle prior, not just in Egypt, but in other civil society, civil resistance movements throughout the world. And what happened even after Tahrir Square, we saw kind of reverberate in other places, even in the United States. And a lot of folks who are connected to the Black Lives Matter movement would even say that they were galvanized by what they saw in Egypt. So revolution is not...
All right.
No, first of all, I disagree with the title in so many ways, fundamentally and absolutely. First of all, I hate the phrase Arab Spring. And I hate the phrase Arab Spring because not everybody in the region where you saw uprisings and revolutions identifies as an Arab. We have a lot of ethnic groups in that part of the world that are often completely erased and ignored, such as the Amazigh, such as the Nubians, many groups. And secondly, a revolution is not a season or a flavor or a color or a flower. And I hate Arab Spring because as soon as something seems to be going wrong, the headlines immediately become the Arab Spring has turned into the Arab Winter. North Africa. And you can even take objection to the Middle East and North Africa geographically, but that would take us into another session altogether. So I would erase the Arab Spring, and I would most certainly not write the obituary for the revolution, because the revolution very much continues. The best thing about what began in Tunisia, and we often forget that it began in this tiny country called Tunisia, population 10 million, in December of 2010, because they really were the ones who set himself on fire. When he set himself on fire, his body manifested a lot of the rage and the deep dissatisfaction with the injustice that was happening in the region. And by setting himself on fire, he set alight our imagination, not to put a finer point on it. And when the Tunisian dictator of decades and decades, and this is a dictator who was held up, as many of our dictators are, in many parts of the world, by Western allies, when Ben Ali ran away, and he literally ran away on a plane with his treasures and gold bullion. When he ran away, I can't tell you how many people I know were in tears, because we saw something we thought we would never see. We made a dictator run away. That set Egypt alight, Egypt set Libya alight, Syria, Bahrain, Yemen, all of that. And regardless of who has been removed and who hasn't been removed, what is clear, including in my own country, Egypt, is that the regime is very much still in place. Mubarak was forced to step down, but military rule is still very much in place. We live under a fascist dictator called Abulhawa from the military, who's given weapons and money by the US, France, so many countries. And we recognize that one of the major goals of the revolution, which was to end military rule, is still a goal, but the revolution is still very much alive. And for as long as everybody I know who will touch that,
was a very spirit of defense in favor of the revolution, certainly very strongly worded objection to the title of this afternoon's panel. And I have two more, so we've got two against the title. Is there anyone here around me who thinks that it might be over? Or are you going to join the ladies and say, you know, no, there's still life left in this revolution?
Well, joining the ladies, of course. I have been witness of revolutions, especially starting in Iran, in my own country. Then I have to leave and travel all around the world, mainly in places that change was happening. And it happened that because of my work, I was at Tahrir Square the day it started, till the day that Mubarak left. And my work has brought being witness of all the changes that happening in the North Africa, in Middle East, in Afghanistan, and Pakistan for the 25 years. So, by definition, is something that could be ongoing for years and years and centuries. I just recall an interview a French TV journalist had talking to Mao Zedong in Beijing, and it was 50 years ago, and French Revolution was celebrating the 150 years of the French Revolution. So the journalist asked Mao, what do you think of French Revolution results? He said, oh, you know, it's too early to have an idea of what's happened to the French Revolution 150 years after. Because the change of the societies takes decades and decades and hundreds of the years to change the society. And what's happened and happening still in Iran, somehow Iran was, and I would say that in the same time what's happened in 79 and 80 in Pakistan, Afghanistan, in Iran, in these three countries, are the beginnings of what's happening now in the Middle East and North Africa. This is all related, all these events. And it is an ongoing project. In Iran, we wanted and we want still to get rid of 2,500 years of the dynasty and monarchy. Can you get rid of it in 20 years, 30 years? No, the revolution is still going on in Iran. And these are what's happening now actually. These are the remaining ideas of monarchies. In Iran we have another monarchs, we have the same system that during the Shah regime was still going on. So the revolution is ongoing and there is no way of calling or writing an obituary for revolutions. This is my chart is about it.
Right. So we just have one more voice before we really open this up.
Okay. I was in Egypt recently because of a story of an Italian young guy who disappeared on the day of the anniversary of the revolution, on the 25th of January. He disappeared and he reappeared 9 days later, and his body had signs of torture.
This is the university
Giulio Reggiani was his name, and you know, he reappeared with signs of torture, and people doing the investigation who said, oh, it was a car accident. Then later the prosecutor, the Egyptian prosecutor said, no, the body has signs of torture. And it started, and this started a huge problem between now Italy and Egypt. The truth hasn't come out. People who have done this haven't been arrested. The Egyptian media are saying that it's crime, and the Italian side thinks that it's not a crime because it was the 25th of January and the whole city of Cairo was full of policemen and security forces, and who could have taken this guy if not security forces who wanted to punish him for something. He was doing a research on trade unions, he had lots of contacts in that field, and so there are these suspicions. But this case that happened exactly on the 5th anniversary of the revolution brought up a problem that many Egyptians are living, because 5 years later, many of the promises of the revolution have not been realized. It doesn't mean that it's time to write the obituary, but it's also something has happened. There's even compared to the period before. I used to live in Egypt as a student, much like this guy. When I went to see his apartment, I was actually shocked because it was exactly my life, when I was his age. And everybody in Egypt is telling me it's not like before. There is a level of violence that is different, because after the revolution, when people were trying to take back the public space, now there is a state that wants to reassert control in an aggressive way. They want to take back all this space. And there have been forced disappearances documented by human rights groups, which the government denies. And torture and this type of instances have been, denounced. And denied by the government. And Giulio Reggiani is an Italian, and he happened to an Italian, and this brought a new attention, I think, an international attention to this problem, but it was a problem there before. And this is one example of a revolution that hasn't gone, unfortunately, in the direction that maybe people were hoping, which is not bad, but at the same time, I think that there have been people who wanted stability, that hasn't been granted after the revolution. And it's a process, and it's very, it's a process, and it's very complicated and violent too. I've also followed for work the Syrian story, and I've been to Syria several times in the last few years. I went there when around Damascus there was opposition. Some areas were controlled by the opposition. I went there when the UN was trying to make a peace deal in 2012. And of course, for the first time, journalists could go to areas that had been closed off from the government. And now we're going through another peace attempt. That was, a revolution that. And now, there's Assad saying we're going to win this. We're going to win back the country, while at the same time he's talking. It's clear that, and I think about Bahrain, where there was a revolution, and then Saudi Arabia sent the tanks to stop it. I remember being in Iran once, and they were talking about Arab Spring, and they were talking about the Arab Spring they like, the one that is, the Shia one, but not the Sunni. So, everybody, of course, there is the Arab Spring, or if we want to call it a different name, has also happened in a situation where there are huge proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and everybody has an interest in bringing them in the wrong direction. I do believe that at the basis of all this, there is a desire for change, a desire for a society that is more equitable, that is, from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, from a political point of view, is more free. I do believe in the people of this region, and that they will realize their dreams one day. I'm only afraid that this day will be far, and that there will be, unfortunately, many more people dead before that happens.
Right. Well, so we have a broad consensus, I think, to say that it's too early to write off the Arab Spring, but we do have from the final intervention a sense that actually things haven't panned out the way one expected. I really want to now draw attention to the way in which the Arab Spring, assuming that there's still life left in it, has morphed. We've seen the unraveling of the state in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Yemen. And I wonder whether my panelists, and this time I will begin on the other side, will very briefly let the audience know how they feel about this unraveling, and whether or not they believe it may have been unleashed or triggered by events around the Arab Spring. Mona.
I want to share with you all three or four things that have happened over the past month alone in Egypt, which I feel the most authoritative about, but I will touch on the other countries as well. Of course, everybody in Egypt is aware of what happened to Giulio, but like you said, what happened to him, which was outrageous, happens to Egyptians every 5 minutes. A very good friend of mine was forcibly disappeared 6 months ago, and we don't even have a body. But I want to talk about these 3 or 4 things that have happened since February the 1st. On February the 1st, and this addresses your question about the state as well. When we talk about the state in Egypt, it's very important to know what we're up against. We're up against, as I said, the fascist dictatorship of Abulhawa, who's from the military. We're up against a security apparatus that during Mubarak's 30 years in power became so powerful because he increased all the different units in it, because he wanted to use it as a seesaw to offset the power of the military from which he came. And he understood that the Egyptian military was very big and very strong and very well armed by the Americans mostly, but also by the Europeans. And so he allowed our security services the civilian security services now, the police and the mukhabarat, to become out of control because then they became powerful enough to counterbalance the military. And then we're also talking about all those other hangers-on. So the multi-billionaires of the business sector that have all these deals with the military and with the security forces, and then the media also, that is an arm of the state, because Egyptian media is by no stretch of the imagination at this point in time the fourth estate, the independent watchdog, none of that. All the independent voices, all the pro-revolutionary voices have been chased away, and it's basically a bunch of CC bootlickers. In this context, on February the 1st, a group of hardcore football fans called the Ultras, many of whom are very good friends of mine, who narrowly survived a massacre that was orchestrated by the military and the police on February the 1st of 2012 during a football match. 72 football supporters were massacred. Now usually when two teams have a football match, or a cricket match, or whatever match you want to play, the losing team is usually the one that is angry and quote-unquote riot or whatever. In this instance, the winning team, quote-unquote, rioted. This was not a riot, this was a massacre, and killed 72 members of Ahli Football Club. The ultras of Ahli Football Club have been on this case ever since, demanding justice, and they feel that justice has not been served, despite the fact that their case is the only case in which a few police officers were sent to jail. And on February the 1st, in the stadium of Ahli Football Club, thousands upon thousands of them were cursing Sisi by name and were saying the people demand the execution. I'm personally against executions and the death penalty, but they were saying in broad daylight, it was actually evening, but publicly, the people demand the execution of the Field Marshal. Who is the Field Marshal? Field Marshal is our former Defense Minister, Elthawy, who was the head of the junta that ran Egypt after Mubarak stepped down. This is on February the 1st. It was so loud, it was shaking the neighboring communities around the football stadium. And you know what Sisi did? On that night, Sisi, our fascist dictator, called a television program, a very popular television program. Hello, I am so sad about what happened to the Ultras. I give them my condolences for what happened 4 years ago, and I know that I've been out of touch with young people, and I'm personally asking the Ultras to work with us to continue this investigation. What would make a fascist dictator that has F-16s from America, jets from France, money from God knows wealth, call a TV station and try to get on the good side of the Ultras? Why? Because he's scared. Another instance of selling up to the state, the Doctors' Union, because we've had increasing attacks on doctors in Egypt by these out-of-control police forces. The Doctors' Union openly flouted the protest law. If you protest in Egypt now, no matter how peacefully, you go to jail for 15 years. The Doctors' Union openly flouted this. They had their biggest general assembly. I'm sure in Pakistan, you have the same obsession with doctors. Every Egyptian parent wants you to become a doctor or an engineer. I'm sure it's the same here. My parents are both doctors, I'm a writer, you can understand my family dynamics. So the doctors rose up, and finally, just I'll end on this. 2 nights ago, a cop got into a fight with a taxi driver in a very big working class, in a working class neighborhood over a fare. The cop pulled out his gun and shot the taxi driver in the head. In front of everybody. That open. And you know what the people in that neighborhood did? Thousands went to the security headquarters in Cairo and protested, and the father of the man who was killed told Sisi, by name, if my son doesn't get justice, we will stage another revolution. And I give you all these instances to show, yes, the brutality is in place, but people understand this is what the revolution did. The revolution allowed people to say no and to understand that they deserve justice and they will get it. So if you see the state unraveling, if you see the state scared, what are they scared of?
Well,
scared of the people.
To focus the discussion more closely on whether or not the events of the Arab Spring, the events around the Arab Spring, have unleashed and hastened the momentum of events elsewhere in the region, in Syria, in Iran, in Yemen, and of course in Libya. And that's what I want Reza to address. Is the cost of the Arab Spring, the cost exacted by the Arab Spring, proving to be too high for the region? Is really what I'm asking now.
Well, first of all, I love these two words, Arab and the Springs. Both of them, no, I love the words separately. Yeah, but you're right, when it's come to nominating the big events, this is normal that journalists or writers, they find a way, one word that will talk to everybody else. So that's how they call it. But what's happening in Arab Spring or revolutions or whatever, let's understand the whole history of the humanity, which is based on people and the one who got the power and finance, money. The whole struggle, the revolutions, the riots, everything's happened in the history of humanity. It's fighting between these two groups. The people in one side, that they have been enslaved, that they are slave now, that they are working for big companies, I mean, what we call it, the multi-billionaires, and the power. And there are a lot of places now, the problem is that this power and this, what we call it, establishment or the big money, they get together. And more people trying to push them back, more they got together also. The fact, for example, just you were talking about media in Egypt. France, which usually is seen as the cradle of human rights or whatever is it, or freedom of expression, 75 or 80% of the French media now they are controlled by 7 big billionaires that they bought all the media, and they are hand to hand with the politicians and the generals and armed dealers that are selling the arms to Egypt and Syria and everywhere. So this is not a paradise now. Everywhere in the past 35 years I was going and I was visiting struggles of the people in all levels, some up to the riots, some became revolution, but this struggle of the people against the power and establishment, it is an ongoing. And it will go on till finally humanity will find an answer for it. An answer that someone doesn't need to take the whole power in one country or became multi-billionaire by doing business. Even this, I believe that this is insane. So we are living in a very insane time of the humanity where the power and establishment and the money get together. That's, I believe that this is the main question. This is the way why the revolution will go on, and then the militaries will be helped by the big monies to come back and kill people, and it is ongoing. But it's, for me, it's an example as a photographer. An image which I have is an old saying that all the darkness of the world cannot extinguish the light of a small candle. So we are living in an area now that the darkness, in the name of the government and the big money, they are trying to bring the darkness all over the world by creating even terror groups, by creating all kind of disease that we know where is coming against people. But the candle, which are the people, are there, and we have seen all over the world every time that there's one guy in Tunisia that he became the candle himself, and he spread the whole revolution. So it is a real ongoing project and no time to stop.
Right. Did the Arab Spring have unintended and terrifying consequences? Has it morphed into a phenomenon that we cannot find or do not have the means any longer to control.
So I think one of the most important things that happened with Tahrir Square is that it really broke people's fear. And the fear of the masses is really the most potent weapon that dictatorships and oppressive governments have. And seeing millions of people gather in Egypt in protest really kind of it broke that fear and it empowered people. So I think that's really been the biggest reverberations. But what I think is missing in this conversation is the influence of external players, which has been really profound. So prior to what happened in Egypt, the revolution, I really don't like the term Arab Spring either, so I'm glad you said that. The struggle in Palestine has been ongoing for 70 years. And we've had, up and down spectacular moments and low-level struggle that has implications in Egypt and throughout the region as well. When Syrians decided to rise up against Assad, that fear factor played hugely in how Assad responded, and I think it's really playing into what Mona's describing in the Egyptian government's reaction now to the people, which is to really instill massive fear, to try and restore the order of fear, because that again that is what made this oppression and these dictatorships function as long as they did. But back to the external players. When the U.S. went in and completely decimated and destroyed one of this planet's oldest civilizations in Iraq, that should not be minimized. From Iraq rose so many forces of instability, of destruction. The most visible, I suppose, is Daesh at the moment. And that also fed into sort of the escalation and the continuation of the Syrian civil war. And of course, even before that, there were elements of Israeli intervention, of U.S. covert intervention, and then more overt interventions from Russia and so forth. So,
and of course Saudi Arabia.
And of course Saudi Arabia, yes. And so while the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and revolutions around the world have been able to play out on their own terms without external intervention, we have never really had that opportunity. We don't, so I don't want to take away agency from the various Arab societies who are rising up. But the truth is that the way things are panning out really has more to do with external powers who have interests in our region and who have been playing with our lives. We're post-colonial nations, and they have been playing with our lives since the establishment of these nation states in the Middle East. And I really think that should be an important part of this discussion.
That's a very important point, which I was going to turn to towards the end. But I will ask you, since you've actually spent so much time in that region, do you think the Arab Spring has hastened the momentum of what some would call Sunni fundamentalism? I mean, we have seen nuts in versions of political Islam, some of them particularly disagreeing vaccine wisdom. Do you think there is some kind of link there? I mean, certainly in Egypt, we've had the development which, in some sense, represents the contradiction, of revolutionists trying to combine the interests of very many conflicting forces, and you have the military, of course, the armed forces, the struggle with ISIS. Now, what do you make of been accentuating the drive towards, as I said, mainly Sunni fundamentalism and Daesh, which is one expression.
I don't think that it's only or necessarily the Arab Spring that there is this cause and effect, automatic cause and effect thing. My experience is this. I think I went to Syria at the very beginning of the revolution, and then I saw it change. I saw the changes. And I remember this conversation I had with somebody who was fighting one of the so-called moderate or more secular groups, and he told me that in order to fight more, in order to fight the regime, they needed the alliance with the more Islamist like groups with suicide bombers, because they were more strategically effective. Because if you have a suicide bomber, you can go underneath a building and blow yourself up. And so they started making alliances with them, and it didn't mean that they necessarily shared the same objectives. It meant that it was a strategic alliance. But you know very well that in a situation like Syria with 200 different groups and with strategic alliances tend to become something that you're not. This is not what you want. And there have been stories published in newspapers about rebels who joined one group, and then they went to Daesh, or they went to so there has been this change, this transformation, linked to many reasons. The groups, what is interesting to me is also the groups like Daesh. They do depend on funding from states like Saudi Arabia, not states, but kind of sometimes private entities or whatever, but much less than other groups, much less than groups that are basically created by Turkey or Saudi Arabia. They, like 8% of the money that Daesh takes is from these states, from funders, from private funders. They are funding themselves with the oil and with taxes. So they are, offering an alternative even to those groups that are funded from the Gulf states. I think, in Iraq, Daesh, if we're talking about the fundamentalism of Daesh, and in Iraq, it's not the Arab Spring that produced this. In Iraq, we had an intervention in 2003. Then we had civil war. We had Sunni Shia violence. Then we had a state that was Shia, and complete dismemberment of the Sunni state, and all the people in the Ba'ath Party and all the people in the administration. What were these people supposed to do? I mean, of course, you are creating a recruiting ground, or you're creating people who will become extremists. And the inability, that is not necessarily a consequence of the Arab Spring, but that we've seen, for instance, in Libya after the revolution in Libya, the inability to share power, the inability to create a real democratic system has been sometimes an effect of the Arab Spring, sometimes it hasn't, like in Iraq. And there has been a Sunni rage in this region against people like Assad, or against the people in power in Iraq. I think that sometimes we look at this phenomena as only religious, and we don't understand the political. We do understand it, but maybe we don't want to put it out. There's a huge political background, reasons in all of this, and they are fundamental to understand Daesh.
I would like to add something very, very quickly. I think what you're asking us is, how much does freedom cost? Because you're asking about the untold consequences and how much does freedom cost?
Yes, I think that is a legitimate question, and one I think a lot of people ask in the region.
Well, I think this is the thing. What are we asking about? Are we asking about a cost to our lives, or are we asking about a monetary financial cost?
Oh, yeah,
and I ask this, I understand.
Human lives.
But the two are intertwined, because when we were rising up against Mubarak in Egypt, the Saudi king at the time, the late King Abdullah, was flinging millions of dollars at his people to anesthetize them with money. And then when Morsi was overthrown and Sisi took over, the same Saudi regime and the UAE was flinging billions of dollars to prop up Sisi. And you're talking about all the other money that goes in from Russia and Iran and Hezbollah to prop up Assad. So we can't extricate the two. And one thing that constantly pisses me off is that we're always, I read this in a Reza story yesterday. It was a story about subsidies in Egypt. And there was this line. The 2011 revolution has scared away tourists and investors. The revolution is not in power. I wish the revolution was in power. Sisi has scared away tourists and investors. The Saudi regime has created chaos in the region. The Americans, the Iranians, the Russians, and Hezbollah, along with Assad, have created the chaos we're talking about. So we can't extricate the human life from the financial life. And the revolution, while at the same time it's told you have failed, it is blamed for these incredibly powerful things of causing chaos and scaring tourist investors. So which is it? Is the revolution powerful or is the revolution weak? That's the question. And the revolution, I believe, is weak, but it is not in power. And it's constantly held to blame for things that, this is the question we should be asking. How much does dictatorship cost? How much does fascism cost? How much does it cost when we as people in that region, or here in Pakistan, or any other country, are constantly forced to choose between the military and the nutcases of the religious fundamentalists? How much does that cost?
Way of sympathy here, I can see. But I think it would be fair to say that for some, the Arab Spring represents in many ways a classic case of a massive civil resistance movement where it's very easy to bring down dictators. But the process of rebuilding institutions after that, and of somehow being able to fill the political vacuum that's being created is far more difficult. So let me just move towards the end by asking each of you in turn very briefly. Do you think, if we assume that this is only a temporary lull in the Arab Spring, but because the causes that triggered the revolution in the first place, in some ways, still remains a thing, poverty, endemic corruption. If this is only a temporary lull, has it encouraged, has it demoralized the reformists? Has it encouraged the hardliners? Which is it?
I think we should move away, first of all, from this language of either or, and also the kind of, lull in something or other. Again, I want to reiterate, I think that revolution is a very fluid, ongoing thing. Just because you don't see this sort of spectacular kind of massive civil mobilization doesn't mean that there's a lull. Just like before what happened, just before the revolution, Tahrir Square, that was a culmination of decades of organizing, of agitating, of subversive, radical movements and actions by activists throughout the country. And I believe that's happening now, not just in Egypt. It's happening in Palestine. It's always happening in Palestine. It's happening in Iran and in Syria and in Tunisia. It's always happening. So I think in the way we speak, we have to kind of, for starters, move away from the slogans and move away from the language and consider that this struggle that we are engaged in is a way of life in many ways. I think the human condition is, I think we have a natural lurch and a natural tendency toward freedom. We have a natural rejection of oppression. And the conditions that we have, the conditions that have been imposed upon us in the Middle East are conditions of oppression, and they have reactions, and these reactions are ongoing and they're fluid. We haven't reached the end of history by any means. Saying things like writing an obituary and so forth, that's really so far outside of reality and outside of what's actually happening
human lives. And I really want to emphasize too the human aspect. I mean, you were talking about just kind of like these vacuums that were created in Iraq and so forth. But the truth is, after a decade of sanctions and then many more years of bombing the water infrastructure and the schools, you have had generations of Iraqis who grew up with minimal or no education, who have been forced to drink polluted water, we're talking about severely traumatized societies now that were once actually very high-functioning societies, regardless of the fact that they lived under dictatorships. So yes, this is going to take generations to resolve because the trauma is so deep and it is so massive, and it is largely from external forces.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, I've just been told that we have to begin to wind down. I will just stay with the watery metaphor, since you don't like love. It's fluid, so let's say the ebb and flow of this revolution. Very briefly, Viviana. Has it, the ebb, as it were, given strength to the reformists, or has it boosted the conservatives? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to work in those sorts of dichotomies, just because of the structure of this conversation.
I think different things are happening in different places. In Libya, unfortunately, we're going towards another intervention, and they're waiting for a state to be there because they think that way, if there is a bombing against ISIS, then there will be a state and there will not be chaos. But it's still an intervention, and we'll have to see what happens. In Syria, unfortunately, right now, even the last peace talks might just bring humanitarian aid, but we don't know politically what will happen, and that's a civil war, and it's a war that is not going to be solved with weapons because everybody's putting them on every side. So, we need to have talks there. I don't know in terms of conservatives, reformists. I think that in certain situations it's just like you have to put an end to the war before you know what is happening. But it is impossible if you don't think about the future. And Assad, can he be president of this place after everything that happened? I doubt it. So it's not that simple, and I don't think it's simply about conservatives and reformists.
Right. So, Reza, who do you think is feeling comfortable or most comfortable at the present time, given where the Arab Spring stands?
I was thinking if I can find the answer about the chicken and eggs, then I will have an answer to your question too. But then let's really, in short times. Susan brought up something that I think that we all have to think in this direction. Our countries, they are not independent. Starting from here, many countries going back to Egypt, we don't have possibility of making decision, even if we come up on the streets about who is going to govern and how is going to govern. We are all this region, Middle East, North Africa, and many of the countries around. Unfortunately, the decisions, what's going to happen, taking care in other countries, and we all know about it. So let's not close our eyes saying that we do this, we are going to do this. We know about it, especially being a journalist, going all around this region for 25 years. I have seen who is take decisions. So this is the main problem that we all have. And when the decision was taken 35 years ago to create a green belt around the former Soviet Union by State Department, this is the green belt that we are having now. Those kind of a decision has influence. When Israeli decided to create an Islamic group to fight Yasser Arafat, that they were secular, and they helped come up Hamas. Now we know what's happened after with Hamas. When the this country, Pakistan, and the CIA, they decided to help very Islamic groups and Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden to fight Russians. We know what's happened after here. So this is all related, and unfortunately, creating the Islamic State and everything has, if you look very close, has a benefit for many European and American countries more than everybody else. European and American, the arm dealers, they have rocketed 300%. We have selling Europe and America the arms, the munition to all these countries. So that's why I think that the main question is this: who is going to see and why those things happening to us? I'm just looking to this past 2 years. I'm working in Iran, in Kurdistan. 2 years.
Very brief,
so,
I've been told
okay. And I have seen the result in the individual. That's what is really touching me on the field, being how we are suffering and still we are suffering. So that's why we have to look who is making this decision, and they are the why that we have to fight.
Mona, did General Sisi have a sleepless night since he had another uprising?
General Sisi is calling up TV stations to basically get on the good side of football fans. So General Sisi is not sleeping well. And I hope none of the shitheads, and I use this word very intentionally, none of the shitheads who have destroyed our countries and stolen our wealth ever sleep well. And I also want to send a very clear message, because I am an Egyptian American. I want to send a very clear message about that racist, fascist shit called Donald Trump. I want to be president. And I want to remind people that just as I opposed the fundamentalists in our part of the world, and I was absolutely against the massacre by the Sisi regime of the Muslim Brotherhood. Almost 1,000 people were killed in the space of 4 or 5 hours. I also, and this is very important to geopolitics, and the entire world absolutely oppose and resist the Christian Brotherhood of the United States in the form of those GOP candidates. So resist and make sure that any zealot and any racist and any fascist doesn't sleep well, whether in Pakistan, Egypt, or the US.
And it just remains for me to thank the rest of my panelists: Susan Abulhawa, Reza Deghati, Mona Elthawy, and Viviana. And thank you all for being here.